Hi guys, welcome to the next installment of the Anatomy of Style. Today we're going to deal with chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is one of my favorite methods of finding atmosphere and drama in a painting or a picture or a drawing. And what it basically means is from dark to light. It's the darkest shadows against the lightest lights. And on an overcast day we don't see this, but on a brightly lit day we can. Or even better, when the sun's at about 1 o'clock and then we start to see a diagonal light coming from one angle. So we need a sunny day for that. We can create that in the studio as well, which I do. I basically buy big softbox lights and daylight bulbs, and it replicates that on changing light, so I get the best of both worlds. I don't have to worry about clouds, for instance. And so it's a very dramatic light. It carves the figure out almost like a statue. And the greatest proponent of that was Caravaggio, very famous for his dramatic light. So we're going to do that. We're going to explore that. We're working with pencil and charcoal. So we're at a slight disadvantage because we don't have the glazes of oils and all that beautiful stuff that really gives incredible depth to a painting. We've got a very dry media, and we also don't have color. So we've got quite a task, but we can still do it. Okay, so let's get started on it. Alright guys, so here I am with my willow charcoal stick. You can see as usual it's sharpened like a screwdriver. I've got the little sides of it also shaved inwards, so it's a triangular kind of thing. Now, with a very difficult pose like this, it may seem like a simple pose on first look, but when limbs start to come down and the back gets hunched like that, we're seeing something unusual. We don't usually see people in this kind of dynamic muscular interaction with forms bunching up the way they do here. So it's an unusual set of muscle interaction, really. And not only that, we've got to deal with the chiaroscuro, which is what the whole movie's about. So a lot of tricky stuff to get sorted. So I'm laying in the basic big stuff as I usually do, big to small. And you can see that I'm starting with this tubular idea, and I've put the head in a little earlier than usual. I like to orbit that around a bigger object, which I have done, but usually that's the last thing I consider. I know a lot of artists make that the first thing they consider, and that makes sense because the head is a device that we can use to measure against the rest of the body. The head's high as a pretty standard measurement, even though people are 7.5 heads usually, or less. But I like to get the big stuff in and then bring the head into the play after that. It's just my method. So remember, all methods are simply that. They're methods, and I encourage you to find your own methods. You know, a lot of the methods I use are a mishmash of other artists that I admired and were great teachers, and I've adapted those methods, and I've expanded on them, and I've created new methods, which is what we should all do. Keep our minds constantly busy. So what I'm thinking about here is the dynamic flow. You know, if we look at that tubular torso, it flows right down through to that long leg. The only thing in this photo, magnificent as it is, that is not quite working for me is that leg up at the back. When I had Alana pose for these pictures, she was moving from one pose to another on a very fast shutter with the camera, and the only reason we've got clarity at all is because it's such a magnificent camera. The EOS, I bought the latest version, which gives the biggest clarity of all cameras so far, and it means I can use a quick shutter and still not have a grainy image, so which is amazing. So one of my prized possessions is that camera, and that's why that leg's up like that. It was in flux, but the shot I got was so magnificent I just took it. Alright, so here we go with the big stuff here. So big to small. Now I love this curvature of the spine, even though it's unusual. And what throws the action off a little bit is the scapula, but I still love it. I love how that scapula, which is basically your wing bones, if you're new to the anatomy, the wing bones of your back. But there's a lot of stuff going on there. You know, you can see, and I consider the scapula one of the most difficult regions to work with because there's so many muscles attached to it. You know, the arm is a continuation of the scapula in my mind, because all the muscles of the arm attach to the scapula, most of them. And the latissimus is also up there, and the serratus muscles, which are coming off underneath the scapula, are all there. So that scapula is a busy machine. And you can see the serratus just after the latissimus, which is that big line that's diagonally coming out from under the arm down toward the back. It actually runs all the way down to the hip bone, but the bulk of it's there. And just under that you can see two little serrated digits, and they're the serratus. There's 9 of them all together. And what's important about those serratus and learning about them is that when you see the last one, it's on the 9th rib. So we know that there's only one rib left after that, the 10th. So we can plot out the using the serratus. Rib cage. We're not seeing so much of the 10th rib here, but it's good to know that. And you can see the ribs on the back coming down quite long. So they come down longer at the back and they're shorter at the front. And there's 12 ribs at the back. And so we continue on down the back longer with the rib cage. The 12th and 11th rib don't come around to the front. They are visible on a very thin person from the front, but as a dot. But very unusual. I've only ever seen it in one model. Okay, so 12 at the back, 10 at the front. So there's the trapezius going in now, if that wasn't clear. And now I'm putting in the bigger stuff here, the breast. So the trapezius, very slight usually on a woman. But on this occasion here we're seeing the bulk of it, and it looks quite substantial. But usually that's a thinner, meaning in depth, muscle. So I'm thinking about now the bulges of the serratus, which are underneath. So we get several layers of bulges. We get the bulge of the scapula. We get the bulge of the teres major, which we don't see from this point much anyhow, which is right up underneath the arm. And the serratus, which I'm putting in now. So the hierarchy is the scapula is on top, and then the trapezius. Well, no, let's clarify that. The trapezius clips the bottom of the scapula. It's a sheet, so it gets thick at the sides, and it's a sheet at the very top, and it clips the bottom of the scapula so that it holds it not fixed in place, but sort of buoys it, keeps it from flying all over the place. So it's a great system. And underneath the trapezius is the serratus, and they're on the, as we can see here, the 9th, 8th rib we're seeing. Usually see 1 or 2 or 3, and if an arm's raised, maybe 5 on a very lean people, or very lean people, on a very lean person, we'll see 5. And they're the basketball player's muscles. They're developed from raising your arms up and pushing forward, like you would with a basketball. So it'd be more the training they do with a medicine ball, for instance. It's also known as the boxer's muscles, because it pushes the arms forward. Alright, that's enough about the serratus. And you know, for some of you it might be even the first time you've heard that name, but it's a big deal on the anatomy scale, especially for me wanting to get the dynamics in. So treating the head now as a very, very simple shape, and basically a flat-ish curve on the front and a bulbous head at the back, because the head is the widest um, at the back. So when we see the curve of the head, we're really looking at the back of the head, because the side of the face is quite flat. It's the skull at the back that gives us that roundness. So starting to work on the scapula now. Now be aware, guys, that all the time that I'm doing this, I am paying attention to the reference. But if I see a more dynamic turn that would work better in the drawing, I'll do it. You know, if I feel that the scapula could have a better angle to it, I'll put it in. Because I don't want to be a slave to this photograph. It's such a magnificent photograph, it's hard not to be, but I certainly want to keep that in mind. And as long as the parts all interact like they would if you did turn it a different direction, then everything's fine. And there comes in the whole idea of why I call everything I do the anatomy of style. Because if we learn the anatomy, we can put style on top. Now watch this, for instance, here on the arm. So I've worked on that arm, going back and forth in a rhythm. I'm trying to chase these rhythms all the way down, from the deltoid down to the tricep. And you'd be surprised maybe just how rhythmic the muscles are, because they have to give way to each other, and so they're usually a similar jigsaw shape, just like the continents. And you can see that here in the deltoids, the triceps, and right down to the brachialis, which is the bulge on the side of the forearm, the outer side. Always remember the brachialis are on the outer side. And so the brachialis, if you look closely, is high on the outside and low on the inside. There's always a high and low relationship wherever you look, and that's once again all part of the system. If everything was side to side, things might break. So there's usually a step down for muscles, so that everything can find its place during a twist. So I'm starting to indicate the separation of the obliques and the abdominals at the front, and also dealing with that mass of the breast as well. So you can see that I'm peaking the tricep there at the back, and that's also a high-low. So the tricep bulge is high at the top, and the bicep on the other side is low. Now muscles are antagonistic, meaning they fight against each other. So when the bicep or the tricep bulge, that usually means the triceps in action, because a muscle shortens and it becomes bulgy, and the bicep lets that happen. And so what it does is it relaxes on the other side so that can happen. So when the biceps bulge, the tricep will usually go flat, and here we can see the tricep is bulged, usually what happens anyhow on a straight arm, and the tricep relaxes a little bit, lets the tricep do its work. So antagonistic is not really the right word. They're actually friendly toward each other. You know, I'm moving aside for you to do your stuff, says the bicep. Alright, so I'm thinking about the hip. The hip's a great fulcrum for the body. And I think of the hip not as just the bones of the hip. I think it as a complete structure that goes all the way up to the obliques, to the top of the obliques, because the obliques are a continuation sort of the shape of the hips. Well, they are. They're a continuation of that shape. And I used to get confused and think that the obliques were the hips. I used to think that was a bone, because it goes up so high. And there seemed to be, in certain circumstances, not really a change. It seemed to be a smooth curve all the way up, so it was hard to plot where the hip bone actually finished. So working on the foot here, and the foot has overlaps to it, because it has a great gigantic calcaneus, which is the heel bone. And it's like, if you ever see the bone structure, it's like a big ostrich. So the foot, even though it echoes the hand, instead of carpals we have tarsals, for instance. We still have phalanges of the toes and phalanges of the fingers, and they're the same amount and all that business. So basically our feet are big strong hands at the bottom, but not articulate. You know, the big toe is not like the thumb. It can't move inwards. So that's the difference. But it's a massive big set of shapes. So I always make the feet big. Never be afraid of big feet. I've seen a lot of students draw very small feet, and it always looks awkward, and they're frightened of the feet. So the foot's the length of the face, really. So you make sure that you can plot that against the face. This foot's foreshortened, so it's shorter. So be aware of that. You can't just make it the same size all the time, but be aware of that. So there I'm indicating the obliques coming up into the fifth rib. They'll disappear into a thin sheet, but you'll often see them continue up higher than you would maybe expect. So working on the gluteus here, and the gluteus, as we've seen before, in part 5 of this series, how great those shapes are for finding light. And so the major light source is going to be there. You can already see it on the hips, how bright that light is. And that's the chiaroscuro idea, that from one light source it carves out the body almost like a statue. And just like the old paintings of Caravaggio, I have placed a lana against a black background here, and that really makes the figure come forward. So that's one of our, I wouldn't call it a problem, but it's one of the tasks that we have to address, because we're not going to have that very black. You know, we could have, but it's going to look a bit heavy on a pencil drawing. And so we're not going to have the same dynamics that Caravaggio would have had with his dark darks and his glazed oils to give you extra depth. We got a very dry surface here. You can see that I've plotted in the eyes of the head there, and the ears as very simple shapes. So remember that. I'm keeping everything simple, structural, all the way through until it gets to the details. Because structure is basically simple anatomy. It's a simplified version. If we were to just go in there and draw the anatomy with every little curve and turn as we go, things would just get out of hand, and we'd lose the plot, really. We'd start to get too confused. Like, for instance, I'm putting in the elbow here. The olecranon is the really peak of it, and thinking about the muscles that run down from the forearm. The forearm is very, very tricky. And so I'm thinking about the flat part being the pollicis muscles that work the thumb, and at the back there we've got the carpi extensor muscle, and in front we've got the carpi flexor muscle. That's what separates the ulna, those two muscles. The flexors are on the top, and the extensors are on the top, and the flexors are at the back. And also note the crease there that I put in to indicate the carpals of the hand, and the carpals are your wrist. Okay, so thinking about maybe a little bit of style early there, a little early, but I can see that I'm going to use omission there for that shadow. And I want that shadow to be bigger than it is in the photograph. So you can see what we have the advantage here at this point. So look at that shadow on the leg. It's got a triangular shape to it that really doesn't ring true, and it's a combination of the shadow coming across from the right leg and also the shadow dropped by the gluteus on the left side. And it's created a little peak there that just doesn't work for me at all. So I'm going to make that one rounded shadow. It's these little micro changes that we make as artists that make all the difference to your drawing in the end. So in my drawing, no one's ever going to go, that's a strange little triangle right there, so I'm not going to put it in. So thinking about the compression of that left gluteus, remember that's straighter, and because it's got the bicep muscles of the leg pressing up against it. That's what creates that straight, relatively straight. Nothing in the body's really straight, nothing in the body's really curved, but there's, you know, relative curves and relative straights, and that's what we're talking about. I had a student once try to draw the figure using geometry, and she plotted it all out with a ruler, and it was very hard because I don't want to put anyone off their ideas, to explain to her that the figure can never work like that. You know, it's just not how it goes. In fact, it was strange for me to to really understand what you were trying to do. So he's trying to measure everything with a ruler. And she says, well, with the foreshortening, we're going to have to measure that out. I says, just do it with your eye. And she was startled by that idea, because to her it seemed impossible. But you can see I'm doing it here. And we may not get everything exactly. You'll certainly not get it measuring with a ruler. So it doesn't matter. And basically the thing that I wanted her to take away with her was that it doesn't matter. Nobody cares whether you're going to get it absolutely perfect. And if they do, they're not understanding art at all. What we're trying to get is the life, the essence, the spirit of this pose in whatever way we can. And all the greatest artists in history, you can see that their work isn't photographic at all. They haven't aimed for that. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to find the best of all that's involved in this. What I love I'll put in, and what I'm not caring for I'll take out. And I think that's a fair method. It works for me, and it worked for all the artists, once again, that I admire. So remember that everything that I'm teaching here is just basically my method. And you might go, oh, you know what, Patrick, I quite like that idea of using a ruler. I'm going to do that, and I'll applaud you for it. Yeah, you go do that. That'll be great, and we'll see what you come up with. Maybe something new and startling. But the example that the girl brought around was clumsy and awkward, and just didn't work at all, and she'd spend hours and hours on it. So it was kind of pointless. So it wasn't working. So whatever works, works. Take anything that I teach you and expand on it. In fact, I would encourage you strongly not to work with my style verbatim. Take what you like about it, change what you don't like, just like I've done. I am a big admirer of Steve Houston, for instance, but artworks are totally different. You put them both together, you can tell right away who did what. And that's how it should be. And that's what art is. Art's about the individual vision of the artist. Okay, so now we've got the complications here once again of the scapula. And I rank difficulty in the figure like this. The hands, followed by the forearm. Not the forearm if it never moved, but the forearm as it twists because of that radius bone pulling muscles with it. And then after that the scapula, because it has movement to it. It's not a solid fixed form. It's a large bone that articulates above other bones. It's not attached to bones at all. Well, no bones are really attached to other bones apart from cartilage, but it's a floating bone, just like the patella of the knee. It's above the bones, and muscles come off it in every direction and attach to the rib cage and the arms, and that way it can move in different directions. One scapula can go up while the other scapula is down. The hips can only swivel and twist and tilt. That's all they can do, because each side is fused to the other side. But the scapulas work independently. So the scapula, as you can see here, is hunched right up. It can pop out of the back. So it's a constantly changing thing. And that's what's difficult about the fingers and the forearm. They're constantly changing things. So relatively, the hips and the gluteus are quite simple. But from a foreshortened view, they're not. So nothing's really simple. The face probably, for me, is probably the most simple thing, because it's nothing moves in the face except for the jaw. The eyes wink, the nose twitches a little bit, but basically the mandible of the jaw is the only thing that's a moving thing on the face in a major way. The lips can snarl and all that business, but basically the big movement is in that jaw. Okay, so, and you can see how long I'm spending in these early stages. And never the detail is in my mind at all. That's something far in the future. And I've seen a lot of drawings where they start with extreme detail of an eye, for instance, and carry on down like that. And I'm very suspicious of a lot of the drawings we see on YouTube, for instance. Someone does a realistic eye, and then they straight to the next stage. It's another realistic eye, and for me, it's probably the cut where they turned the projector on and off that they were tracing from. But I've seen portrait painters and drawers, artists in Piccadilly Circus in London, and they do exactly that. And they're obviously not tracing at all. I consider it though a trick. It's a one-trick pony thing. And talking of ponies, if I asked those artists to draw a horse, they wouldn't have the first idea. Maybe some might, but by and large, they're working with a system that says the head's fused and the mandible's not going to move, and so they've understood the head completely, and it's a great way to make a living, because all they need to do is just adapt a basic head to match the person in front. A little change here in the eye and nose, and it's pretty much done. So they do that. But if you did it with a figure like this, you couldn't do it. Try it and see. I mean, there's some great artists that work, it's called that automatic drawing, where they do work from the top to the bottom, and I've seen some great results from it. But these are the guys that really are already huge masters of their craft. I wish I could remember the name of the figurative artist I saw do that, and I did a beautiful drawing out of it. But his better drawings were obviously like this. They were simple, big shapes, enlarged on as he went. And so, like I say, this is a method, and for me it works, and I enjoy this little puzzle at the beginning, and then the style on top. So basically, for me, if you haven't got the due diligence part done, really, you're not going to work very well in the render part. Treat the render as the dessert. It's something that you reward yourself with after you've done all that hard work. Because if you go straight to the dessert, you're not going to feel very good about it afterwards. Just like going straight to dessert. I just think there's not enough nutrients in there to sustain the drawing. Don't know why that amused me so much. I don't know what's in my head sometimes. A strange analogy. Alright, so working on the obliques there, and feeling that lovely form of the obliques. Obliques are beautiful. They twist the body, so they change their form a lot. But it's a basic form. Now the ribcage are always tricky, especially from the back coming down so fast like that. It's an odd thing, and I usually leave them odd or dim them down somewhat. But on this dynamic pose, they're actually adding to the lovely rhythm that's going on there from the scapula downwards. So in this case, I'm gonna maybe make something of them, leave them in. And once again, I'm thinking of style a little bit here. Like I said, a little early, but once you learn the rules, you can break them. The main thing is to get the rules so, really I shouldn't say rules, the method so well that you can see ahead and break the rules that way. So I'm breaking the rules by fading that furthest arm, because I want that to fade into shadow. So I've already got an idea in mind what I'm going to do there. So you can see here that I'm thinking of that lovely flattish top of the rib cage there before it starts to pull down into its curve. And the scapula is a problem for me here. It used to be always, but I think I'm a bit cocky here, and I really believe I know the scapula well enough to put it in without too much care or worry. And I've actually made it a little round, a little too round there. And that's one of the bugbears that I'll have to address later. But strangely, I don't see it yet at this stage. And well, it's not strange. It's what we commonly do as artists. We get close to the art, and we start to miss the big things and start thinking of the small things, and that's the problem with detail. So I think we should step step back from the art as much as possible. And you can see there's pauses here where I step back. And when you step back, sometimes take a little break and step back for quite a time and really glance back and forth at the model and at your artwork. And it has a kind of sinister look to it because you're, darting your eyes back and forth. But what happens is it's almost like a moving image. And I have my class all step back and do the same thing. We're just flicking our eyes back and forth between the model and our drawing. And that flickering back and forth actually creates in your drawing a flickering idea where you can see all your errors. You can see one thing's too round or one thing's too short. And once again, not worrying too much that we're copying something, but sometimes the laws of nature, are out of whack, and that can't work. A nose is always higher than the lips, unless you're Picasso. That's a broad idea, but that's the idea of it. So we're checking the laws of nature when we do that. It must look very strange for someone that walks into the class and sees us all standing there silent, flickering our eyes back and forth. But it's a great way to see your errors. So I'd say get used to that. And it works great for me. When I'm trying to get, sometimes, I like to do a kind of realistically proportioned figure, like I'm doing here. And like I say from the start, this photograph was so tremendous, I almost didn't use it. It was too good. It was so good that I felt, silly. But I felt that maybe I couldn't compete with it in a drawing. Sort of rather a scrappy old photo that you would look at and then look at my drawing and go, oh, that's a big improvement. So let's be brave. Fortune favors the brave, so they say. And I feel now that, and talking about separate lives, the photo has a separate life from the art. If I was to do a photo exhibition, I'd just have the photos, and people would come along and they'd go, oh, lovely photos, or I don't care much for that photo. But there'd be photos on their own. And then if I had a drawing exhibition, there would just be the drawings. So we wouldn't be going, where's the photo that this was derived from, or where's the drawing you derived from this photo? And nobody cares. We didn't see the models that Caravaggio worked from. It would be interesting to see them, but we don't really think about it. We just look at the art and go, wow. And that's what counts. So basically the art lives a separate life from the photo. And if we learn to tune out from the photo, if you stop looking at the photo right now and just look at the drawing and just stare at that drawing, you go, hey, that's pretty good, or it's not my style, or whatever it is, but you'll have a conversation that says, there's a drawing here that's interesting in some respect. And the minute you look back at the photo, you might fall into that trap of going, oh, right, there's the photo, he's got this wrong and this right. And basically that's a layman's idea, that if you're drawing a photograph, then you have to get it perfect. And that's not the canon in art at all. So, where I grew up, very working class, if you got it really photorealistic, I think most people would go, bravo. And if you didn't, maybe go, oh, it's not as good as the photo. But, as artists, we have to let go of that. And for a long time, I couldn't let go of that. I wanted to impress my dad, with photorealism, because I knew he would really appreciate it. But at the end of the day, you've got to just drop your ego and do what you believe is right, and then you'll get all the praise from your fellow artists, and your dad will probably enjoy the drawings after a while as well. So I'm gonna, because you can expose people to art, and they start to get it, they start to understand it. My wife's not an artist, but she's grown to really appreciate art, and she can see now, after years of looking at my works, what's right and what's wrong in him, and she can even, talk artistic terms. That sounds a bit belittling there. She's a very, very clever woman. She's a teacher. But art, like I've said before, or maybe I haven't, but it's worth repeating, is there's art and there's everything else. Nothing else equates to art, in my mind. I had a model once try to equate art to sport, and I just couldn't see anything further from art than sport. And he's talking about competition, and I'm going, what competition? And she was going, well, between other artists. I says, well, that doesn't happen. That's not, well, it shouldn't happen. There shouldn't. In fact, the word art competition to me is a crazy idea. Art competition, artists competing. I guess maybe that's in their mind, because basically an artist doesn't compete with anyone. An artist is basically drawing the best they can on a surface, and between them and the surface is all that matters. And if their work is compared to someone else, it's quite wrong. Uh, you know, I'm thinking of Laurie at the minute, who painted little matchstick men, and I couldn't say to him, "Oh, your art's terrible. It's just little basic matchstick men in factories. That's like a child's work." But he was very, very popular, and he was rightly so, because he did his own thing, and he didn't care, and became very famous because of it. And I think that's the message that I'm trying to convey here, that basically as individual artists we find our own paths, and the worst thing you can do is start looking at other artists and say they're better than me, or I wish I was as good as them. It's human nature to do that, but basically there's only going to be one you, and there's only going to be one me, and that's what we need to work with. And if you keep that in mind, it should give you, some security in the fact that what you're doing is important. It's important because you're doing it on your level, you're doing it with your style, you're doing it with your method. Even though it might be a continuation of other methods that you've learned, it doesn't matter. The way you lay your strokes down are going to be slightly different than mine, and all those slight differences are going to build up over the years to become your style that's instantly recognizable as a drawing or a painting. And if it doesn't do that, then you might be copying too much. So I'd say learn to interpret more rather than to copy. And at the start you have to copy. You have to learn how stuff works. But try and let go of those reins as soon as possible, is my advice. Try and be you as soon as you can. Okay, but never stop learning is another thing. I see a lot of artists fall by the wayside because they basically got their style, and then they never ever went back to basics again. And what happened was is their art started to degenerate because they lost and forgotten the basics of skill, the basics of method, the basics of the human figure, which is basically what the artists that I meet are working with. We're all in the same boat together when I go to conventions. It's all figurative art. Okay, so sorry, I've got a cold today. If you wonder what my voice is so strange, so you won't catch it. One of the great things about watching on in a movie, you're not going to get these boy germs. Now I just put a little curve in there, and there's these subtle curves all the way up the body. And by putting the basic shapes in first, it means I can really articulate those curves with much more ease. And I love those little subtle changes. Keep your eye out for them. At the start, you'll be struggling just to get the structures in. But draw often, and I can't give a better advice than that, is that it's all up to you guys to draw as much as you can. And the more you draw, the more adept you'll be. And the more you draw, the more you'll see. And the more you see, the more those shapes will become familiar. And then you can bend those shapes to your will, because you know what they are. Once again, the anatomy of style. When I came up with that title, I couldn't believe it hadn't been used before. And I did an internet search, and I couldn't find it. I thought I must be cribbing this from somewhere, but it didn't exist. Much later I found it as a fashion term, I think. But it's never happened, and I'm very grateful that I managed to pull that out, and it just came from the subconscious, because it's exactly what I was doing. I was using anatomy and putting style on top, the anatomy of style. So I'm very, very lucky to have that in my in my worldview and my methodology, and it's a part of what we're going to come up with in the next last week is all about the inner workings of the mind. I know it seems a bit deep, but really it's understandable. Come to that point where we'll all do it. Ask ourselves, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? So I'll talk about that, because for me it's been a revelation, looking deep inside and asking myself those questions. Ask yourself that question now and see what the answer is. Why am I doing this? Okay, and then check in next week and see if it rings any bells in what I came up with, what my reason was. Okay, so there's a cliffhanger for you. Okay, I'm using my pit charcoal pencil here. Beautiful darks. So I'm going for the inky blacks here. And note when I get into the hair that I give it quite a bit of rhythm. So hair does anything it pleases. So you can really go wild with hair. Where hair's a great thing to get gestural with. If you've been working, with stiff gesture all the way. Sorry, stiff structure. Gesture is the opposite. That's this cold. That's what I'm blaming it on. So once again, always use my gestural hand. I'm not sure if I've used the detail hand here, probably for that ear. This is a good time to look at the ear as a mnemonic. Remember, mnemonics are obscure, surreal ways of remembering something that's hard to remember. But if you look at that ear, it's like a little cowboy hat on its side, with the concha being the back part that attaches to the skull. It's also what we hear, where all the reverberation comes from. So look at it there, little cowboy's hat. And that was one of my favorite mnemonics, and I didn't invent it, but I'm not sure who did. But it was always, when I first saw it, and went, that's comical, that little cowboy hat stuck to the side of a head there. But I tell you, it's such a great mnemonic for hitting a very, very tricky structure from the back, and it works every time. And you can see Steve Houston, who I do remember, using the mnemonic of a little whistle notch for the eyes going into the head. And maybe it may not resonate so much now, because it's been a long time since we've seen those whistle notches in popular culture. So if you look at Mickey Mouse's Steamboat Willie, when he pulls the cord for the horn of his boat, it's a whistle, and and the notch is where the sound comes out. So I understood what Steve was talking about there, so that works for me. So those little mnemonics throughout are terrific. Cowboy hatch and a whistle notch. It's hard to unsee it once you see it, but obviously that you elaborate on that like I've done there. Put a little bit of eye makeup on to just change that a touch, a little up the ways makeup. And I like the eyes to be cat-like on a woman, just for a stylistic idea. So it's one of the things I usually do. I'll turn the eyes up a little at the sides. So using my finger and paper stump to get into the minutiae now, the soft blends of things. And I still haven't addressed that round scapula yet, which I'll have to get to. So when I'm doing my blending, I'm on high alert because I don't want to over soften everything. Using the Kneadable razor, and that stops it. Kneadable razors, even though it's a softer razor, it still looks like a hard line next to blends. So I'm finding all the little moments of light, and now we're really thinking hard on the chiaroscuro the chiaroscuro idea of one-point light. And usually you'll find the highest lights right next to a shadow. As the form turns, the shadow drops onto the form, and because it's a raised surface where or if it is a raised surface where the shadow drops, then it's going to have that highest light next to it, usually, like you can see on the breast there. And some shadows are, like the drop shadow starts as a hard mark, a hard line, and then becomes a softer line. As you can see, is the arm dropping that shadow down from the scapula across the breast starts to get a little softer. I tend to keep those drop shadows pretty hard because it adds to the chiaroscuro effect, that it's a bright light. You see I'm using lost and found lines here. And you'll also note that throughout this whole drawing, I haven't used the eraser to make corrections. So if you pay the piper at the start, step back often, and work light to begin with, and get dark gradually, then you really don't need the eraser. You know, the pentimento idea of searching lines, you know, they start to fade anyway, visually. So you can see if there's any left there at all. And I'm not saying that you don't need the eraser, but you won't need it unless it's a major change. And one of the I'm not saying I'm the greatest artist that ever lived, that I don't need an eraser, but you can see if I raised down into that scapula and finally address that rondishness. So a straight on a curve as quite an idea to get your head around. But basically, when I find the biggest curve, I'll put a straightish line on it, and it really gives it a lot of authority. So using a little mono eraser here, and the mono eraser is just like a pencil, and an eraser on top, and some are little points and some are square edges, and they're really good. Make sure you don't rub too hard, because this is newsprint and it'll rip up. And people have asked me, why would you do a nice drawing on newsprint? Because it's gonna fall apart eventually. Well, it can be preserved for 100, 200 years behind archival glass and just with care and stuff, so I don't really care much about it. But also, if you only do finished drawings every single time, then your art will suffer because you've dropped the mileage. And the mileage I'm talking about is drawing often. So I can do loads of drawings on butcher's paper. But if every drawing I do is going to be a finished drawing, then I'll do much fewer of them. And that means my mileage has dropped severely. Whereas if I do 6 figures a day instead of 1, I've learned so much more. I've seen new things. I've seen new angles. I've learned something. Always learn something. Never stop learning. With every drawing, there's always something that you'll do that makes a change. Now, sorry, I'm going off the surface or the screen here. Just bear with me; that'll come back. But using a hard charcoal, compressed charcoal here, I want to put that step that Alana's resting on there, because I really like the dynamics of it. The dynamics of that very hard straight against this beautiful, constantly undulating and changing figure is it's a contrast. Contrast is, you can find in many ways. The contrast between dark and light, and the contrast between forms. A textured form next to a soft form is going to make the texture more textural and the form more soft and smooth, just visually, even though you haven't changed the form at all. I love using these compressed charcoals, turning them on their edge and twisting my hand as I go, and you can really see the benefit of the gestural hand here. You know, you couldn't do this with a pencil grip or a writing grip at all. You would end up with just a point all the way through. So you want to really understand the benefits of the gestural hand. Try both there. Take your compressed charcoal and try and do it with a writing style grip. and you'll see what I mean. And also with these compressed charcoals, they're very, very dark. So I'm going very light here. You don't have to go, just touch the paper and lean a little heavy for the darks, but don't go in there hard. So at this stage I've gone in with a bit of tissue and blenders and all that business. I'm trying to really find the chiaroscuro here. Now I could have called this drawing finished a couple of times, but since I'm talking about chiaroscuro, I better put some dark in the background. And there's that idea again. That's a kneadable eraser, and I'm just turning it and twisting it to get these little energetic marks. Now with the kneadable eraser you might be going, hold on, is that a kneadable eraser? It's black. Well, I rarely throw the kneadable erasers out until they come to a stage where they're actually hard like stone, and then they're unusable. But basically the kneadable erasers, they almost last forever, as long as you don't drop them in dirt. That's the worst thing you can do. If you drop them in dirt, they'll pick up grit, and you just throw them in the bin then. And I've done that with a few. I've just dropped them on a concrete floor that's dusty, and then that's the end of it. But the darker ones, the ones that have been charcoal ridden for a long time, pick up less, and so you might go to yourself, I don't want to pick out too much here. I'll use that very dirty one. And if you want to pick out really crisp highlights, then you grab your brand new kneadable eraser. That'll pull out much more because it has more grip to it. So less grip on these darker ones. So this is always the struggle of an artist. How much is too much? How little is too little? I used to call art back and forth, and that's what I'm doing here, back and forth. Is it too much? Should I have even bothered? You know, like I say, if you look a few stages back, it was fine. The drawing was finished. But since this is all about learning experience, I want you to see if it goes too far. And remember also that a drawing is finished when the artist says so. So you can say that's an unfinished drawing because it doesn't have polish to it. But I say it is a finished drawing. The artist stopped. So when the artist stops, it's finished. That's all they wanted to show you. They believed that was all that was needed to be said. And that's, I love that idea. But like I say, I'm going further here because this is it's a commissioned work for a magazine. I rarely do commissions, by the way, for commercial art anymore. But Imagine FX, they're a little special. You know, they give me quite a lot of freedom. And if there's no freedom in the commission work, I don't do it. So here we are with the finished art, and you can see that it's quite I fiddled a little bit more with that, but basically I've taken you right through the whole thing. So it was great fun doing this one, guys. I hope you learned a lot from it, and looking forward to seeing you in the last segment, which I promise is going to be, hopefully, enlightening. It's going to be a look into my mind as an artist and address all those maybe subconscious worries that you have in your mind, or maybe something you haven't even thought about yet. Sometimes people don't go introspective into their methods until they're in their 50s and 60s even. When you start to get really serious and look back in your life and go, what was that all about? But if you get in there early, it's a much easier path than have to retrospectively come back and go, I could have done it this way, or if only I'd known this then. So hopefully that's going to help you in your journey forward as an artist, in your, to keep your mind at ease, that this is something we basically all share as artists, this idea of art being a personal vision, a personal way of seeing things, an individual way of showing the world how you saw things. So looking forward to that next week, and I promise you a really beautiful drawing to go with it. Alright guys, until then, good luck with your art.